Dawn broke to the crash of doors being rammed open. On a chilly March morning in 2022, coordinated police raids erupted simultaneously across Derbyshire, Leicestershire, and London. Elite tactical teams flooded a sleepy Derbyshire town, a suburban Leicester street, and a South London barbershop. In those chaotic minutes, officers in black ballistic gear swarmed through doorways and stairwells, shouting warnings and securing stunned occupants. In South London's Lewisham district, a team poured into a small barbershop, a seemingly ordinary business that masked an underworld hideout. As glass shattered and boots thudded on stairs, two Albanian-born brothers, Edmund and Edward Haziri, were caught utterly off guard. The Haziri brothers had spent months believing themselves untouchable, living like underworld kings. Now they were face down on the floor in handcuffs, taken down in the dramatic culmination of a year-long investigation. In the Midlands, their associates met the same fate. Police dragged disoriented men from houses in Swadlincote and Burton-upon-Trent, and one more was cornered in a village near Cannock shortly after. In a matter of minutes, the EddieLine drug empire had come crashing down. The kingpins and their foot soldiers alike were headed for custody, and a sprawling Class A drug network was exposed for all to see. It hadn't always looked like this gang could be touched. For nearly a year, the Haziri brothers' crew ran the EddieLine, a county lines cocaine operation that pumped drugs into communities across 3 counties. They supplied the town of Swadlincote in Derbyshire, the villages and suburbs of northwest Leicestershire and nearby East Staffordshire with a steady flow of high-purity cocaine. Business was booming. By using a single dedicated phone line, nicknamed the EddieLine, they coordinated dozens of deals a day. Users and street-level dealers would ring up the line to place orders, and the gang's couriers would swiftly deliver small wraps of cocaine, often cleverly disguised inside folded lottery ticket stubs. A staggering volume that filled the gang's coffers with hundreds of thousands of pounds in profit. While money flowed in, the Haziri brothers basked in wealth and status. The inner circle, led by Edmund Haziri, 36, and his younger brother Edward, 34, enjoyed a lavish lifestyle off the proceeds of crime, leaving a trail of addiction, crime and misery on the streets below. From their base in London, the brothers spent freely. Designer clothes, expensive jewelry, luxury cars, all paid for in cash earned by feeding the habits of addicts in small Midlands towns. The gang idolized the gangster life portrayed in films. In one raided apartment, detectives found a giant poster of Al Pacino's Scarface character, Tony Montana, dominating the wall. It was a telling symbol of the Haziri's mindset. They fancied themselves underworld emperors living above the law. In truth, their gleaming Mercedes and flashy watches were bought with blood money. Every pound in their pockets came from someone else's despair. The desperate addict stealing from family to buy another hit, or the local teenager groomed into street dealing. They reaped the rewards of their crimes, living large in London and beyond, while the cocaine they poured into Midlands communities destroyed families and relationships. The EddieLine gang's tentacles reached far and deep, but for a long time they operated in the shadows. They took precautions to avoid detection. Dealers handed off drugs in public places under the guise of innocuous transactions, a quick handshake or passing of a folded lottery ticket that to any bystander looked like litter or a harmless note. The gang rotated vehicles and phones regularly. Many of the dealers were not from the local area, making them harder for small-town police to recognize. Some came from as far as Romania and Albania, drawn into the operation by the Haziri network. The Haziri brothers themselves rarely set foot in Derbyshire. Instead, they managed the supply chain remotely from London, maintaining control through tightly organized intermediaries. Gazmend Hoxha, a 47-year-old relative of the Haziris, acted as a crucial courier, driving from his home in Leicester down to London to deliver bags of cash and pick up fresh batches of cocaine for the Midlands. Hoxha's routine supply runs, conducted every week or two, kept the dealers stocked with product. He was careful, often varying his routes and travel times. Unbeknownst to him, automatic number plate recognition cameras quietly logged his car's journeys up and down the M1 motorway. Each trip south with tens of thousands of pounds in dirty money, each return north with kilo packages of cocaine hidden in his vehicle, brought risk, but Hoxha had done it many times and felt confident he was under the radar. On the ground in Derbyshire and Leicestershire, a network of lower-level conspirators handled street distribution. The gang employed local men like 32-year-old Joshua Garrigan of Colville, who knew the back streets and clientele in northwest Leicestershire. In Burton-upon-Trent, 27-year-old Razvan Manoliu ferried drugs to users around East Staffordshire. Two brothers, Samuel and Simeon Stoiker, in their 20s, operated from Wolverhampton, ready to drive into the Midlands with resupply or extend the network's reach into the West Midlands when needed. And there were others. Christy Prifty, 23, a street dealer and runner with no fixed address, and Alban Krasniki, 34, an Albanian contact based in London who helped coordinate the phone line itself. Each member had their role to play, but they were all replaceable cogs in the machine. At the top sat Edmund and Edward Haziri, the brothers who gave the EddieLine its name and direction. They were careful never to personally handle the drugs on the street. Instead, they managed the operation like businessmen managing a franchise. They insulated themselves with layers of subordinates and communicated via the single line phone that only trusted lieutenants held. It was organized crime, cloaked in the mundanity of everyday transactions. Haircuts at the barbershop, lottery tickets, used cars shuttling on highways, all hiding an illicit trade worth over £1 million a year. The community impact of the EddieLine was devastating. In the quiet town of Swadlin Coat, residents had watched their neighborhood change over the months. Small-time local addicts suddenly seemed to have a constant supply of cocaine, a drug that had once been rarer on those streets. Crime began to rise in tandem. Shopkeepers noticed more thefts and break-ins, suspecting that drug users were stealing to fund their next fix. Parents grew anxious as they heard rumors of dealers hanging around local parks and high streets. It used to be a quiet town, recalls one lifelong Swadlin Coat resident. But then you'd see these flashy cars from out of town cruising around at odd hours. We knew something was wrong when we saw quick handoffs in broad daylight, a handshake here, a slip of paper there. We were afraid for our kids. In local pubs and cafes, talk of that Eddie drug phone began to spread, an open secret that if you had the right number, you could get cocaine delivered as easily as a takeaway meal. Community leaders and youth workers grew frustrated seeing the effect on young people. A youth outreach volunteer in Swadlin Coat noticed more teenagers dabbling in cocaine and ketamine. These gangs hook them with free samples or easy cash to run deliveries, the volunteer explains, shaking his head. Suddenly, a 15-year-old is carrying drugs for some big city gang, and we're the ones picking up the pieces. The EddieLine crew didn't care about the misery they sowed. Their only concern was that money kept flowing. And for nearly a year it did, while the community's pleas for help grew louder. The beginning of their downfall was almost mundane. In mid-2021, many months before the dramatic raids, a sharp-eyed police community support officer, PCSO, noticed something unusual during a routine patrol in Swadlin Coat. Parked behind a row of shops was a grey sedan with a London registration plate. The driver, a young man the PCSO didn't recognize, appeared to be loitering, nervously checking his phone and scanning the street. When the PCSO approached to see if everything was all right, the driver hurriedly pulled away. This small incident raised an eyebrow, a stranger acting suspiciously in a town where outsiders seldom went unnoticed. The PCSO made a report of the encounter, noting the vehicle's details and why it seemed odd. That tip reached the local police intel unit. By itself, it was a minor red flag, but soon other pieces began to click into place. Over the following weeks, officers started hearing similar reports. Unknown cars from outside the area coming and going at all hours, brief meetings in parking lots and side streets. Local beat cops and community members provided snippets of information. Partial license plates, descriptions of drivers, which analysts began to cross-reference. Patterns emerged. Several of the vehicles had ties to known drug hotspots in other cities. Surveillance units were assigned to quietly follow some of these suspicious cars when they appeared. Sure enough, the grey sedan spotted by the PCSO turned up again in Swadlin Coat, and this time plainclothes officers tailed it. They watched as the driver made multiple short stops, meeting individuals for less than a minute each. Classic behavior for a drug drop-off route. The driver was careful, circling the block to check for tails, but he didn't spot the unmarked police car always a turn or two behind. At one stop, uniformed officers moved in and conducted a quick search of the man's vehicle. Under the passenger seat, they found the corner of a lottery ticket sticking out. Unfolding it, they discovered it concealed a small plastic wrap of white powder. It was cocaine, just a few grams, but enough to confirm their suspicions about the lottery ticket dealing method. The driver was a low-level courier, one of the many runners for the EddieLine. Faced with arrest, he gave up a little information, admitting he worked for someone he only knew as Eddie in London and that he'd been instructed via text where to go each day. This corroborated what the detectives were starting to suspect. A county lines network was in play. Derbyshire police launched a covert investigation, later codenamed Operation Wildflower, to dismantle the EddieLine. A dedicated team of detectives from the County Lines Task Force began piecing together the hierarchy of the gang. They worked in tandem with regional colleagues, sharing intel with Leicestershire Police and even looping in the Metropolitan Police in London as the scope widened. Surveillance intensified. Officers placed tracking devices on key suspect vehicles under cover of darkness, and analysts pored over cell phone records linked to the suspicious phone number that local users whispered about. By late 2021, investigators had mapped a web of frequent communications and travels. Calls and texts clustered around Derbyshire, Leicester and London, and cars shuttling on regular runs between those hubs. Every piece of the puzzle was documented with painstaking detail. Detectives sat for hours in stakeouts on quiet residential streets, observing suspected stash houses and handoffs between gang members. They seized opportunities to make traffic stops where they could, each time hoping to find drugs or cash that would further illuminate the operation. Often they turned up small but telling evidence, a few £1,000s in vacuum-sealed bundles here, a notebook with cryptic numbers there, multiple cheap pay-as-you-go phones stashed in a glove box. It wasn't enough yet for the whole case, but the fog was starting to clear on who was responsible. By the beginning of 2022, all roads led back to the Haziri brothers, Edmund and Edward. The Derbyshire detectives, through months of patient work, identified the brothers as the likely kingpins of the EddieLine. The evidence was mounting. Phone analysis suggested that a device used to orchestrate deals, the line phone, was often physically located in the Lewisham area of London, where one of the Haziris lived. Financial investigation added another layer. Although the brothers had no legitimate jobs or declared income, they were clearly spending large sums. Edward Haziri was ostensibly the proprietor of CSG Barbers, a small barbershop on Lewisham's High Street. On paper, it was a humble business. In reality, few haircuts were happening there. Undercover officers who casually visited noted that the chairs were often empty of customers. Yet Edward drove an expensive late-model BMW and wore designer shoes that would cost a barber several months' earnings. Edmund Haziri, the elder brother, had no fixed address listed. He floated between apartments and hotels, often in upscale parts of London, and spent considerable time at his brother's barbershop. Surveillance suggested that the barbershop was more than it appeared. Men known to police as gang associates were seen coming and going after hours, sometimes carrying bags. There were whispers that a secret basement existed below the shop. If the Haziris suspected they were being watched, they didn't show it. They felt secure behind layers of henchmen and a facade of a normal life. In reality, the Haziris' barbershop was hiding a gambler's paradise and a criminal headquarters. When officers eventually breached that Lewisham business address on raid day, they were astonished to discover a full DIY casino hidden beneath the shop floor. The brothers had outfitted the basement with poker tables, blackjack setups, and a fully stocked bar, a private den where they and their inner circle could party and launder cash. Piles of casino chips and playing cards still lay on the green felt tables, mid-game, on the morning of March 23, 2022, when police rushed in. It was here, amid the clatter of slot machines and the haze of cigar smoke, that the Haziri crew had likely celebrated their drug-fueled profits, believing themselves beyond the reach of the law. This brazen extravagance in the bowels of a nondescript barbershop showed the gang's arrogance. As Detective Inspector Kane Martin, the officer leading the case, later remarked, They reaped the rewards of their crimes, living lavish lifestyles in London and elsewhere, while the cocaine they pumped into the Midlands destroyed families. The contrast was stark: flashy underground casinos and high living for the gang bosses, paid for by shattered lives in quiet English towns. By March 2022, Derbyshire's Operation Wildflower team had gathered enough evidence to strike. The plan was to take down the entire network in one coordinated sweep. If they moved against one part of the gang at a time, they knew others would scatter like cockroaches in light, possibly fleeing the country or destroying evidence. The police spent weeks planning the takedown. They secured search warrants for over a dozen locations, ranging from the sleek London hideouts to modest terraced houses in the Midlands. They coordinated with the National County Lines Coordination Centre to get additional funding and support. Crucially, they roped in Metropolitan Police units to hit the London targets and Leicestershire officers to assist locally. The element of surprise was paramount. Surveillance had revealed that the gang was most vulnerable in the early morning, before phones started ringing off the hook with drug orders and before couriers hit the road for the day's deliveries. Thus, at dawn on March 23rd, multiple strike teams assembled quietly near each target, waiting for the go signal. When the clock struck 7 a.m., the raids began in unison. In Derbyshire, a police enforcer team smashed through the front door of a suspected safe house in Swadlincote, flooding inside before the bleary-eyed occupants could react. In Burton-upon-Trent, another team cornered Razvan Manoliu, the local dealer, as he stepped out of his flat. He was taken down in seconds, a bag of white powder falling from his hand. In Leicestershire, officers surrounded the Leicester home of courier Gazmend Hoxha, but found it empty. Hoxha was already on the move that morning, requiring a rapid adjustment of plans. He would be caught later that day, stopped in his car near Cannock, where officers found bundles of cash in his boot. And in London, the Metropolitan Police's organised crime team descended on two key sites: the Haziri brothers' barbershop on Lewisham's High Street and an apartment tied to their associate Alban Krasniqi in Blackheath. The entry at the barbershop was explosive. Officers pried open the metal shutters and breached the door, throwing stun grenades that sent shockwaves through the narrow shop. Amid hair clippings and overturned barber chairs, they found Edward Haziri and another man sprinting toward a back room, likely trying to reach the basement or destroy evidence. Both were tackled to the ground before they could hide or arm themselves. At the same time, on a quiet residential street in Blackheath, another team battered down the door of Krasniqi's flat. Krasniqi, who had been asleep moments before, made a panicked attempt to save the one thing he knew could sink the entire operation: the EddieLine phone. The search for the elusive EddieLine phone became a drama of its own. As officers swarmed Krasniqi's cluttered flat, they noted the decor: a floor-to-ceiling poster of Scarface's Tony Montana glared down at them from the wall, almost like the patron saint of this criminal enterprise. There were also telling signs of wealth and trafficking: wads of $50 notes bound with rubber bands, expensive sneakers still in boxes, and at least half a dozen mobile phones scattered on a coffee table. But the one phone that mattered, the dedicated iPhone used as the EddieLine hotline, was nowhere to be seen. It soon became clear why. A Met Police dog handler outside signaled that his canine partner had picked up a scent in the adjoining garden. Incredibly, during the chaos of entry, Krasniqi had managed to hurl the EddieLine phone out of his bedroom window moments before officers burst in. The sleek iPhone, holding the secrets of the entire operation, sailed over a fence and landed in a neighbor's bushes. It might have been lost forever in the undergrowth, but a highly trained police dog found it, sniffing out the device within minutes. An officer triumphantly held up the phone in a clear evidence bag, shouting, "Got it," to the team. The Hazari's empire had depended on that phone. Now it was in police hands. Back in Derbyshire, similar scenes played out as addresses linked to the Stoica brothers and other gang members were searched top to bottom. The haul of evidence was enormous. Officers emerged from properties carrying bags stuffed with cash, bricks of cocaine, and paraphernalia for drug cutting and packaging. From Edmund Haziri's luxury rented apartment, they seized designer watches and Italian-tailored suits. Incongruous items for a man with ostensibly no legitimate income. From the barbershop basement casino, they collected ledgers that appeared to double as score sheets for gambling and accounting logs for drug deals. One officer lugged out a heavy bag and quipped, "Either they were playing with a lot of poker chips, or those are coins. And I don't think they're coins." In truth, the bag was filled with cash. The gang's profits stashed on site, amounting to tens of thousands of pounds. Photographs taken later showed neat stacks of $50 notes laid out across a table alongside the seized drugs. Tellingly, among the seized contraband were numerous lottery ticket wraps preloaded with cocaine, individual doses ready for a resupply pickup that would never come. The meticulous packaging demonstrated how systematically the gang prepared their product for street distribution, each small packet hidden in something as commonplace as a lotto slip to fool any cursory glance. All this evidence painted a vivid picture of the operation's scale and sophistication. But the crown jewel of evidence remained that EddieLine iPhone. Once the dust settled and the suspects, around 10 of them, were transported to custody, detectives focused on unlocking the secrets within that phone. They immediately encountered a hurdle. The device was locked with a 6-digit passcode. A 6-digit code has a million possible combinations, and the phone's security settings meant only a handful of incorrect tries would render it inaccessible or erase its data. Breaking into it by brute force wasn't an option. They needed the code. Normally, officers might lean on the suspect, in this case Krasniki, to divulge the PIN, but unsurprisingly, he refused to cooperate, likely hoping the evidence inside would stay hidden. Thus began a race against time and technology. Police forensics experts knew that getting into this phone could make the difference between a watertight case and one that relied on more circumstantial evidence. They analyzed the phone's backups and SIM card, but nothing readily gave the code. Traditional hacking methods were too slow or risky given the phone's protections. Instead, the investigative team recalled an interesting piece of intelligence they had gathered weeks earlier. During the surveillance phase, the team had conducted deep research into the gang's routines. One detective remembered that they had captured CCTV footage of Alban Krasniki making a purchase at a convenience store, possibly using Apple Pay on his iPhone. Could it be that the footage showed him entering his passcode? The detectives pulled up that video. It showed Krasniki at the register of a small shop holding his phone to the card reader. As the transaction failed on the first attempt, he could be seen tapping in a code on the phone's screen before trying again. The camera angle was not ideal, but the officers had noted this at the time as potentially useful. Now, with the actual phone in hand, they had their eureka moment. The code Krasniki entered on CCTV was likely the very same 6-digit unlock code. Freezing the frame, they painstakingly deciphered the angles of his finger taps. With anxious excitement, a detective input the 6 digits into the seized iPhone. In the late hours of March 23rd, after multiple tense months of investigation, the phone finally unlocked. Its screen lit up, revealing a trove of incriminating data. There were endless scrolls of text messages detailing drug orders. There were lists of drop-off locations, some just nicknames or initials that the investigators nonetheless recognized as local landmarks and customer monikers. The phone's contact list was essentially a who's who of the gang's clients and sub-dealers, and GPS location data tied the device to various stash houses and meeting points on crucial dates. It was as if the gang had kept a diary of their crimes on this phone, unwittingly providing detectives with a map of their entire network. The data also revealed details of the gang's financial dealings. Notes in the phone showed crude accounting, likely the Haziris or Krasniki tracking money in and out. Figures like $5,000 Tuesday, Leicester Run, and $20,000 wrecked, London, indicated the flow of cash. Police also found selfie photographs, one of Edmund Haziri grinning while holding a bottle of champagne in one hand and fanning out $50 notes in the other. Another of Edward Haziri sitting behind the barbershop counter late at night, a handgun, which was never found during the raid, tucked visibly in his waistband, perhaps a boast sent to friends. This trove of evidence cemented the case. Combined with the physical seizures and earlier surveillance logs, investigators now possessed a comprehensive story of the EddieLine's operations, from sourcing to distribution to profits. As one prosecutor later noted in court, the phone was like having the gang's ledger and phone book and day planner all at once. With it, charges could be laid not just for individual drug possessions or deals, but for the overarching crime of conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. The Haziri brothers and their colleagues wouldn't just be slapped on the wrist for small quantities, they would face justice for the full scale of their drug trafficking enterprise. In the days immediately following the raids, more arrests followed. Gazmend Hoxha, the Leicester-based courier who'd initially evaded the Dawn raid, was tracked down within 48 hours. He realized something had gone wrong when he couldn't reach the Haziris or anyone on the network phone. As he tried to lay low at a relative's house in a village near Cannock, police traced his vehicle through highway cameras. Armed with an arrest warrant, they moved in and captured him without incident at a rural petrol station. He was pumping fuel, perhaps considering a longer escape, when officers boxed in his car. At the time of his arrest, Hoxha had in his possession a notebook with addresses and a significant amount of cash, further tying him to the operation's logistics. Another figure, Daniel Stavrat, a 29-year-old with no fixed address, who had been involved as a secondary courier and occasional enforcer, was also picked up soon after. With that, the core members of the EddieLine gang, 10 individuals in total, were in custody and awaiting trial. The courtroom saga that followed would stretch over many months, testing the resolve of law enforcement and delivering dramatic moments to rival a crime thriller. The first decision for each of the accused was whether to admit their guilt or fight the charges. Confronted with the mountain of evidence, nearly half of the gang folded early. Alban Krasniqi, caught red-handed with the phone, not to mention the Scarface shrine on his wall, opted to plead guilty to conspiracy to supply cocaine. So did Joshua Garrigan, Razvan Manoliu, and Daniel Stavrat. These men likely struck deals or hoped that a guilty plea would earn them a measure of leniency when sentences were handed down. But the Haziri brothers themselves, along with a few loyal lieutenants like Hoxha and the Stoica brothers, denied the charges and insisted on standing trial. To them, it may have seemed there was a slim chance a jury could be convinced of their innocence or that some technicality might save them. Perhaps the Haziri's arrogance persisted. They had, after all, evaded consequences for so long that facing judgment in a British court must have felt surreal. The trial commenced at Derby Crown Court in early 2023 and would last 8 weeks. Prosecutors laid out the case in painstaking detail. In their opening statement, they described the EddieLine as a highly organized criminal enterprise, run like a business with a clear hierarchy and a dedicated customer hotline. The jury learned how the gang had processed an estimated 9 kilograms of cocaine over the year, a haul worth up to $1.1 million on the street. They heard how an innocent-looking barbershop in London concealed a criminal HQ and how the gang's leaders modeled themselves after fictional drug lords. At one point, the prosecution even introduced into evidence a photo of the Scarface poster from Krasniqi's flat, suggesting that the defendants glamorized violence and the drug trade. If it seemed theatrical, it was also effective in painting a picture of the gang's psyche. Witness testimony brought the investigation to life for the jury. Derbyshire detectives who had worked the case took the stand to explain how the operation unfolded. One surveillance officer described long nights staking out the Haziri's barbershop, observing luxury cars coming and going at odd hours, evidence that important meetings were happening there under the guise of a legitimate business. A digital forensics expert walked the court through the contents of the EddieLine iPhone, reading out transcripts of damning text messages and showing the jury a map dotted with GPS pings wherever the phone had traveled. Jurors leaned forward as they listened to a particularly incriminating exchange. On one recovered chat, Edmund Haziri, using a codename, instructed a dealer about a drop-off 3X at usual spot and later messaged another underling to pick up the 15 from G at noon, which the expert interpreted as directing someone to collect $15,000 from Gazmend Hoxha at midday. This evidence illustrated how directly the Haziris managed the drug line. Another compelling witness was Detective Inspector Kane Martin himself, who led the investigation. He recounted the story from that first PCSO tip to the final raids, emphasizing how teamwork and small community hints snowballed into a major case. At one point, the prosecutor asked him to describe the impact of the gang's activities. Speaking firmly, D.I. Martin stated, "The EddieLine was responsible for poisoning our streets with harmful drugs, but the gang simply didn't care about the damage they left behind. He went on to describe families torn apart by addiction and how local crime spiked due to the influx of cocaine. His words hung in the air, reminding everyone that beyond the intrigue of a police bust, real people had suffered because of the defendant's actions. The defense, for their part, tried a variety of strategies. Lawyers for Edmund and Edward Haziri attempted to cast doubt on their leadership role. They argued that the brothers were mere bit players or legitimate businessmen unwittingly caught up with the wrong crowd. Edward's counsel claimed he really did run a barbershop and that any appearance of wealth came from successful business and help from family overseas, not drug money, a claim undermined by the prosecution's detailed financial analysis and the utter lack of legitimate income records. Edmund's defense suggested that he wasn't physically present for any drug deals and questioned the reliability of some witness identifications, hinting that perhaps he was being confused with another Albanian man, an argument that didn't hold for long, especially once the jury saw social media photos of Edmund wearing the same gold Rolex that officers had seized from him during arrest. For those defendants caught more directly, like Hoxha, the defense played technical angles, challenging whether a certain search had proper authorization or whether the evidence definitively proved the contents of the packages he ferried. They nitpicked over the interpretation of text messages. Was 15 in a message currency, or could it have been something innocuous? Was Eddie truly referencing the Haziris, or could it have been a nickname for someone else? These arguments, however, rang hollow in the face of the comprehensive narrative the prosecution wove. Piece by piece, the state's case built an unassailable picture. All the defendants were threads of the same tapestry of conspiracy. One dramatic moment in the trial came when a former drug user from Swadlincote took the stand as a witness for the prosecution. Under guarantee of anonymity, this witness recounted how he had been a customer of the EddieLine. His voice trembling, he described the ease with which he could get cocaine delivered. "I'd text the line and they'd reply in minutes, usually with some instruction like, wait by the phone box, and a car would show up. It was always different people, different cars, but I remember one guy had a London accent. He glanced over at the defendants as he spoke. They didn't care who you were. As long as you had money, they would serve you. I lost my job and my family because of drugs. People like them don't see that. They don't see us as human." His testimony put a human face on the harm caused, and one could sense a shift in the courtroom. The jurors' gazes toward the accused grew a little colder. After weeks of evidence and cross-examinations, the jury deliberated. It didn't take them long. In late March 2023, the verdicts were returned. Edmund Haziri, guilty. Edward Haziri, guilty. Gazmend Hoxha, guilty. Samuel Stoica, guilty. Simeon Stoica, guilty. Kirsty, Prifty, guilty. The 6 who had stood trial were all convicted of conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. Their co-conspirators who had pleaded guilty earlier were simply awaiting the same judgment from the bench. As the foreman read out guilty repeatedly, the Haziri brothers displayed little emotion. Edmund pursed his lips and looked down at the floor, perhaps already resigned to his fate. Edward closed his eyes briefly. For a moment his facade cracked, and a slight shake of the head betrayed frustration or disbelief, but he quickly masked it. In the rows behind, a woman who had been identified as a Haziri family member broke into muffled sobs. It was a definitive victory for the prosecution. All 10 members of the gang would be punished. Sentencing was scheduled some weeks later to allow time for reports and for the judge to consider the appropriate punishment for each man. On a late spring day at Derby Crown Court, the defendants once more filled the dock, this time wearing the plain prison-issue sweats and flanked by security officers. Family members of the accused sat anxiously in the public gallery alongside a few local residents and journalists who had followed the case. The courtroom was hushed as the judge began to deliver his remarks. He spoke of the cynicism and callousness of the operation, noting how the Haziris had lived in luxury by exploiting the misery of others. He highlighted the brazenness of using a community business, the barbershop, as a cover, describing the hidden casino as illustrative of their greed. Addressing Edmund and Edward directly, the judge said, "You were the orchestrators of a criminal network that extended far beyond your London base. You targeted provincial towns precisely because you thought you could do so with impunity. You were wrong. The evidence shows you saw yourselves as untouchable drug barons, but today the law touches you, and it will hold you accountable. Neither brother met the judge's eye as the reproach was delivered. They stared straight ahead. Then came the sentences, each greeted by a palpable intake of breath in the room. Edmund Haziri, identified as a ringleader, was ordered to serve 15 years in prison. His younger brother Edward Haziri received 15 years and 6 months. Slightly higher perhaps, due to an additional charge or a leadership role in the London End. Gazmend Hoxha, the dependable courier, got 11 years behind bars. Alban Krasniki, whose quick thinking to jettison the phone ultimately failed, earned himself 9 years. Samuel Stoica, 25, who had been a key distributor, received 8 years and 3 months, while his younger brother Simeon Stoica, just 22 and one of the most junior, got 3 years and 6 months. Christy Prifty was sentenced to 4 years. Joshua Garrigan, the Colville contact, and Razvan Manoliu, the Burton dealer, had both cooperated and pleaded guilty early. Each was given 2 years and 8 months for their part. Finally, Daniel Stavrat, whose sentencing had been deferred, would face the judge the following month, but it was clear he would receive a similar prison term in the low to mid-single digits of years. In total, the judge noted, the gang was removed from society for over 70 years combined. It was one of the heaviest collective sentences for a drug network Derbyshire had seen in recent memory, reflecting the scale of the crime. There were emotional scenes in the courtroom. As the Haziri brothers were led away, their mother, a petite woman who had flown in from Albania for the trial, cried out softly, clasping her hands as if in prayer. One of the Stoica brothers briefly turned and lifted a hand to wave at a young woman in the gallery, his girlfriend or sister perhaps, and tears streamed down his face as he mouthed, "I'm sorry." The woman pressed her fingers to her lips, a gesture of heartbreak and farewell as he disappeared through the door to the cells. But on the other side of the aisle, there was relief and grim satisfaction. A Derbyshire community leader who had attended the sentencing remarked quietly to a colleague that justice had been done. Outside the court, a small crowd had gathered. Some were local residents from affected areas, including a few who had lost loved ones to drug abuse. A mother from Swadlincote, whose son had struggled with cocaine addiction, spoke to a reporter with a mixture of sorrow and hope. "My boy nearly died because of this," she said, eyes red but determined. Hearing the judge say 15 years for those brothers, it won't undo the damage, but it feels like a weight off our community. Detective Inspector Kane Martin addressed the media as well, praising the collaborative effort that brought down the gang and sending a message to others who might be involved in the drug trade. Standing before microphones and cameras, he declared, "The Haziri brothers and their gang are now spending many years behind bars, and I hope this sends a very clear message to anyone else involved in drug dealing. We will catch you, put you before the courts, and stop you from spreading misery and addiction in our communities." His words underscored the point that this victory was part of a larger battle. The crowd, including uniformed officers who had worked the case, nodded in agreement. The fall of the EddieLine was a warning to other criminal gangs that no matter how untouchable they think they are, persistent police work and community support can bring them down. As the dust settled, the story of the EddieLine entered local law, a Netflix-worthy true crime saga that had played out on their very doorsteps. People in Swadlincote, Burton and Colville spoke of how their neighbourhoods felt different now. A bit safer, a bit freer from the shadowy figures and constant churn of drug cars. Police noted a dip in the local cocaine supply, though they remained vigilant for others trying to fill the void. In London, the little Lewisham barbershop, once a front for a criminal empire, went out of business. Its shutters closed for good. The interior stripped of the lavish casino trappings after the Met's financial investigators seized assets. Neighbours who once wondered why a barbershop had such a lively after-hours scene now knew the truth. The broader context wasn't lost on authorities either. The Haziri case was emblematic of a growing trend of Albanian-run gangs in the UK, and it validated a nationwide crackdown on seemingly innocuous businesses like barbershops being used as fronts. But above all, the EddieLine case became a testament to the power of community vigilance and thorough police work. A single observation by a local PCSO, a car out of place, ultimately led to a complex investigation and the toppling of a major drug network. One tiny domino tipped, and months later an entire criminal empire fell. The streets of Derbyshire's towns are quieter now, without the constant hum of that once infamous hotline connecting desperate buyers to ruthless sellers. The Haziri brothers, who once fancied themselves untouchable Scarface figures, now wake up each morning to the cold reality of a prison cell. Their story, rife with greed and cruelty, ended not in the mansions of their dreams, but in the custody of Her Majesty's prison service. In the end, the EddieLine's legacy is one of lives damaged and lessons learned. For the community, it's a cautionary tale of how organized crime can infiltrate even the most tranquil locales, and how important it is to speak up about suspicious activity. For law enforcement, it's a blueprint of a successful takedown, combining local insights, patient surveillance, high-tech forensics, and interagency cooperation. And for the gang members themselves, it's a harsh lesson that crime eventually meets justice. The judge's parting words during sentencing still echo, "Exploiting people for your own gain has earned you this outcome." The Haziris and their cohorts will have many long years to reflect on whether it was worth it. Meanwhile, Derbyshire's residents can breathe a little easier, knowing that the EddieLine has been severed, and the people who ran it will not be walking their streets for a very long time. The fight against drugs continues, but this chapter has closed with a clear message. Those who poison communities for profit will be hunted, caught, and held to account.